So good morning. I am Regina Egea, president of the Garden State Initiative, and along with our co-sponsors, the New Jersey Society of CPAs, welcome to today's virtual forum, during which you will hear from outstanding policy and political leaders from both New Jersey and Pennsylvania. We're taking a look across the Delaware first to Pennsylvania, where recently enacted a plan to dramatically reduce its business tax rate. We'll begin by exploring what drove that policy decision and then a discussion about the impact on New Jersey. Pennsylvania currently levies the second highest corporate tax rate in the US, right behind New Jersey, where it's the highest. Their decision to cut the rate by 50% over the next decade will position Pennsylvania among the 10 lowest in the country, as well as the lowest in the Northeast. To discuss how all this happened in the Keystone State, we're honored to be joined by three guests. State Senator Ryan Aument, who is widely credited as the driving force behind the tax reforms. Elizabeth Stelle, the Director of Policy Analysis at the Commonwealth Foundation, a Pennsylvania-based think tank. And Jay Brower, Managing Director and the leader of the CBIZ Marks Paneth SALT practice in Philadelphia. So let's dive in. We'll begin, Elizabeth, with you, if we can. You've written at length about how Pennsylvania's economy and business climate has been lagging in the US, with high taxes as a large factor, which is obviously very similar to New Jersey. Can you give a brief recap of the current state of Pennsylvania's economy, please?
Sure, Regina. Good morning, everyone, and thank you for taking some time to learn about what's happening in Pennsylvania. And I hope we can give you some lessons to apply in your own state. In Pennsylvania, as you know, we've struggled with our tax rates as well. We also are a very highly regulated state, partly because we have a lot of energy. So it is not known as a state that is easy to do business. In fact, we regularly hear stories of folks moving across the border to Ohio and West Virginia. When you look at rankings in terms of where does Pennsylvania stand, there are a couple that stand out. We're regularly in the bottom 10 states. If you look at the ALEC Laffer Rich States, Poor States ranking, the latest one that just came out is the Tax Foundation State Business Tax Climate Ranking, which is very relevant to today. And in that ranking, we're still ranked 33rd. So not great. Obviously, that looks at where we're at today and not what our new CNIT rate will be in 2023. But we're consistently at the bottom. And it's not just our CNIT tax, it's a variety of taxes. We also like to have a lot of tax policies that do not conform to federal standards. So we make things very difficult, maybe good for CPAs, but not so good for small business owners. So in general, we're towards the bottom regionally when you look at the Mid-Atlantic, on the higher end when you look at just the Northeast, but Pennsylvania has a long way to go in terms of our tax rates. Our one bright spot is our state individual income tax, which is flat and relatively low. But even with this one change, we're still looking in the business tax climate ranking of somewhere around maybe 20, maybe 17 if no other states make tax changes. So when I'm looking at the state of Pennsylvania's economy, I'm not just looking at status quo, I'm looking at what's happening around the country. And we've seen 13 states, I believe, lower their CNIT this year. So it's very competitive. We're not just competing with other countries, we're competing with other states. In fact, I would argue we're doing more competition with other states. It's actually more common now to see jobs moving to places like North Carolina and Texas than it is to, China or Singapore. So we have a long way to go. The CNIT has kind of been the big prize because it is so high, but it's just one step in many, many steps that we need to take to make Pennsylvania more competitive across the country.
That's a great foundation. Thanks for sharing that with the audience. So maybe then seems appropriate to turn to Senator Aument to, I guess, you're widely credited, as I said, with, driving the legislation. So I have a two-part question maybe to kick us off. Firstly, when we spoke recently, you mentioned that as an aging state, Pennsylvania needed to modernize the tax code. And that sounds pretty similar to New Jersey. So maybe tell us more about that first before we get into the actual change you made.
Yeah, thanks so much. It's great to be with you and excited to talk about the effort here in Pennsylvania and follow up with what Elizabeth said. This is a significant and a historic step forward for us. We recognize, I certainly recognize, there's much more work to be done here to position Pennsylvania for economic growth. And that, from my perspective, that ensures that we protect the C&I reduction and stay at a minimum, stay the course over the next 10 years. I'd quite frankly like us to accelerate that over the next decade. I'm sure we'll get into that later. But yes, Pennsylvania, in the 12 years that I've been in the General Assembly, the data has been really bad when it comes to our demographics, and that has gotten worse. The IFO, the Independent Fiscal Office, continues to flash the warning signs with respect to our aging population. The fastest growing age demographic in Pennsylvania are those aged 85 and older. We continue to increase in population of those beyond prime working age, and we're continuing to lose population of those of prime working age between the ages of 24 and 59. Some of that is due with the birth rate here, but some of that is also due to talent going elsewhere to experience economic opportunity. We have outstanding institutions of higher education here in Pennsylvania. We have outstanding trade and technical schools. We have outstanding apprenticeship programs, but yet young people are going elsewhere to Ohio, to even Indiana, to West Virginia, to North Carolina, Texas, to experience opportunity. This has applied real pressure on our budgets over the 12 years that I've been in the General Assembly. Pennsylvania is a loving, generous state to our senior citizens, and we should be. But this does have an impact on the expenditure side of the ledger, and also applies pressure on the revenue side of our budget. And so from my perspective, the answer for Pennsylvania is to retain the talent and to attract employers, new businesses, new industry, and employees who will come here, attend our outstanding institutions of higher education, and then stay here and experience economic opportunity and upward mobility here. And what we've heard from the business community, what I've heard over the time that I've been in the General Assembly, and certainly even more passionately in the last 3 or 4 years, is the number one barrier. The number one barrier has been the 9.99 C&I rate. And so I'm pleased with the historic step we've taken, but again, there's much more work to be done.
So you're confirming very similar issues in New Jersey, particularly the younger generation really going to school in other states, in New Jersey's case, and staying out of state as they begin their careers. And it's a similar challenge we've got. So let's get into a little bit more of how you accomplish this. I mean, and it really is amazing, at least from the chair that we're sitting in. It's amazing in this hyper-partisan era that this legislation was supported by unions and businesses, was passed by a Republican legislature and signed by a Democratic governor. And even more impressively, as I understand it, both of your candidates for governor are saying that whoever's elected, they want to accelerate the timeline. So Tell us, how did you accomplish this, you and your peers?
Well, I'm thrilled to hear both candidates for governor talk about accelerating the timeline for the C&I reduction. It's certainly my intent to test them and hold them to their words next year. But I should point out, this did not start as a bipartisan exercise. At the end of the day, we were able to get a meaningful reduction passed with large bipartisan majorities in the House and the Senate, and signed into law by a Democratic governor. But it did not start that way. This has taken years, quite frankly, to get to this point. And I give a lot of a ton of credit to the outside advocacy organizations. So the conversation we're having here today and the work that you're doing is exceptionally important for laying the groundwork and building the momentum. The work the Commonwealth Foundation has done in Pennsylvania, they have been a solid voice on this issue for the 12 years that I've been here in Harrisburg. But the Pennsylvania Chamber, the Philadelphia Chamber of Commerce, the Pittsburgh Chamber of Commerce. I spent a lot of time, my district is in Lancaster County, northern Lancaster County, so I'm the central eastern part of the state, but I've spent a lot of time in recent years in western Pennsylvania. And Matt Smith in the Pittsburgh Chamber. Matt Smith is a former Democratic member of the Pennsylvania Senate who's done a great job out of the Pittsburgh Chamber. But they've done polling. They made the case in western Pennsylvania how business and industry have fled and opportunities have been lost, specifically to Ohio, because they're so close to Ohio, and Ohio's been a much more competitive environment. So these advocacy organizations have been laying the groundwork for years, worked with us in the legislature on messaging, presented us with the polling data. That's been extremely important. Pittsburgh Works, which is a very fascinating alliance in Western Pennsylvania in Pittsburgh, that is a alliance between labor and business, has been a solid advocate for this issue. So I can't emphasize enough the importance of stakeholders who have an interest. The NFIB, the small business community, were at the table and advocating for this change because they understood the impact this would have on small businesses, and sort of erasing the myth that this is just about benefiting corporations and CEOs, that small businesses benefit, that employees benefits, workers' wages will go up. And so we worked very hard to lay the groundwork legislatively with the partnership with the outside stakeholders. That was important. And then last budget, I guess the last two budgets, the governor gave a nod in his budget address to the C&I reduction. And so we saw the opportunity, particularly this year, with the governor in his final year of office, and really pitched him on this being a legacy item for him, a real opportunity as he's going out of office to take this historic step to reduce C&I. And I know we have a follow-up question, so I won't get into it now, but a real key part of our strategy also was confronting directly what has been the barrier for this getting done for the last 25 years since we had our last reduction, was directly confronting the notion that this will result in a loss of revenue, and that we should view this as a pro-growth step. So I know we'll get into that later, but that was another key moment in this debate, was sort of shifting that conversation.
Well, that's very helpful in that, this whole idea that these things don't come easy or quickly, and it takes determination and collaboration. And I think that's going to be an important conversation we'll also be having later on in the webinar with the New Jersey team that we'll be bringing on. But let me bring Jay into the conversation for a minute, because Jay, we've talked a lot about the accomplishment at a legislative level and the overall, work that was done. But maybe you could, bring into focus for us that, what the clients are saying. Commonwealth released a statewide poll that indicated, more than half of those surveyed believe that Pennsylvania was worse for business, and only 14% thought it was better. So tell us what you were hearing while this was going on from your clients and what they're thinking about this now change.
Okay. Yeah, thank you. It's a good question. So I think that 10 years ago, Pennsylvania had an administration and legislature that were starting to enact some pretty favorable reforms, especially tax-related reforms for businesses in the Commonwealth. At that time, we still had the capital stock and franchise tax, which had been around since the 1800s. And back around 2000, I think it was Governor Rich and the legislature then had enacted some laws to phase that tax out of existence. It was a very complicated tax to understand and to calculate, and it was sort of businesses weren't aware of it. So Pennsylvania was sort of seen as a gotcha state. Hey, you didn't know about this tax? Well, here it is, and it was just something that was very, very unfavorable to businesses coming into the Commonwealth. So this tax began to get phased out. Then they stopped the phase outs for several years. And eventually, I think around 2012, they reenacted the phase outs, and the tax did eventually go away. So we saw that happening. We also saw a move to what we call a single sales factor for apportioning business income to the Commonwealth. And I realize people on the call may not be tax savvy, but this is a way to measure how much of a company's income is earned in the Commonwealth. And what Pennsylvania and most other states used to do was we looked at the amount of your sales in the state, your payroll, and your property in the state. And we came up with a fraction or a percentage. So the more payroll you had in the state or the more property in this you had in the state, could be a factory, an office, well, the more tax you paid to the Commonwealth because you had a higher payroll factor or property factor. We got rid of the payroll and property factors like most states have done, including our friends across the river there in the Garden State. So Pennsylvania moved to a single sales factor beginning in 2014. That is something, so you're no longer punished in a way of higher taxes by hiring more people in the Commonwealth or building a warehouse or other facility here. So that was seen as a favorable thing that occurred in the, within that 10-year period. But early in that 10-year period, we also made a lot of favorable reforms to the Pennsylvania tax appeals process. Pennsylvania appeals process is not the best in the nation. It's better than it was. It still could be improved in many ways, we think, but they did make some changes to that process. And they also expanded some various tax credit programs in the Commonwealth, encouraging businesses to do things like fund schools in the area. You get tax credits for that. So that those
sounds like a long and winding road. That
yeah. So those programs were expanded. So again, this was going on in 2014. Unfortunately, the past since then, things have actually regressed in a few areas, like maybe in tax appeals. So I think, part of the attitude, I think maybe more of a, hey, what have you done for me lately kind of thing. I can point to things that Pennsylvania did in 2012, 2014 time period. Since then, not so much going on. So I think that the 9.99% corporate tax rate is sort of hung around the Commonwealth's neck like an albatross. You look at the rates among the states. 9.99% were the second highest in the country. And if you're here in Philadelphia, where I am, there's an additional almost 6.5% tax. So you're talking 17% if you're in the city of Philadelphia. So sure. I think that that has been a very negative. It just doesn't look good as far as optics is. Hey, if I want to move, I want to open up a business in the Commonwealth, especially a larger business, that let's call it 10% tax rate keeps potential businesses out.
Sure. Very, thank God for, I guess, New Jersey. We got, we're the highest. We got the second highest, but
yeah.
So, very, complicated, long winding road. And, as I agree with you, what have you done for me lately, which is obviously what we're here to talk about today. And if I can go back to Senator Aument, you've alluded to this before when the question of, cutting taxes come up, the anxiety level rises about, well, how are we going to deal with, less revenue from a state funding perspective. So maybe we'll start with you, and Elizabeth will come back to you as well about how did you deal with that and how is it addressed?
Yeah, no question that was a challenge at the outset. In some respects, our budgeting process is served somewhat as a barrier here for many years. We have a balanced budget requirement, and I am fully supportive of a balanced budget requirement. I'm fully supportive of limiting spending going forward as a factor of inflation. So I'm all for those important reforms. But I've argued over the time that I've been in Harrisburg that we should have a longer range perspective on what some of the investments we make on the expenditure side, and particularly tax reform. And you have a longer view as the benefit, because any tax reform, it gets caught up in this false narrative that it will result in a loss of revenue that has to be offset by another tax, another fee, or a spending reduction. So we took that head on right from the outset when I introduced my legislation and said that we reject that notion, and we think we have really compelling data from around the country, states who've enacted tax reform, states who've enacted corporate net income tax reduction, that has led very rapidly to an increase in revenue, if not in year one, certainly by year two. So what we did when we introduced the legislation, now this was not what was enacted, but I think it helped shift the conversation in terms of the messaging and helping us make the case in terms of this being revenue generating is the proposal that I introduced at the outset was a performance-based proposal. So we put Pennsylvania on the path to a 4.99 rate, but we reduced over 3 years my proposal from 9.99 to 6.99, and then we put performance-based triggers in. So if the reduced rate at the 6.99 rate, if that brought in more revenue than what the IFO was projecting at the old 9.99 rate, and I have no doubt that it will and that it would, that would then trigger a further reduction the following year. And we did that all the way down to 4.99. So I think that helped shift the conversation. So I think it's twofold. One is the performance-based approach and saying, if we just take away this sticker shock of the 9.99 and we communicate to the business community around the country that Pennsylvania is open for business and serious about tax reform, we will see a dramatic increase in revenue in the near term. So I think taking that argument on directly was important with the performance-based approach, as I've said. And then two is the data around the country is very compelling when you look at the experience of other states when they reduced their CNI and what the immediate benefits of that were. So have that data handy and just keep repeating that point. Oh, I'm sure folks got tired of me, but you just have to repeat that point over and over and over.
And it sounds like, Elizabeth, you were part and parcel of this communications and keeping the data in front of everyone.
Sure. And we point to kind of the avoiding the traps that have befallen us before and that some other states have experienced where they're successful in reducing a tax to a significant amount. And it's a great fanfare that they say we're open for business, but they don't do anything on the spending side. And then they end up with huge structural budget deficits, which then turn back into new tax increases. And the cycle continues. So while we've been advocating for a CNIT reduction for a long time, we're also at the same time advocating for what Senator Aument alluded to, and that's the Taxpayer Protection Act Index, which says government spending growth. So we're not talking about caps. We're just talking about a limit on the growth of state spending should be linked to inflation and population growth. So the basic idea is that your government shouldn't grow faster than your economy. And, that is maybe kind of a high bar for Pennsylvania and New Jersey, but we think it's a really good starting place. And we've had lots of conversations about that, and we're still running that marathon. I think we'll get there someday. But Colorado has been a great example for us there because they actually gave their taxpayers rebates this year. Wouldn't that be great if we could do that in Pennsylvania and New Jersey? So it's a twofold process. You have to have some spending controls as you're reducing taxes, and the triggers that Senator Aument mentioned are a great way to do that if you're really worried about the revenue figures. Iowa did this. They've been another success story where they have revenue triggers on their reductions in their corporate net income tax. And, I've been looking at them closely as well because they were right up there with us, with New Jersey and Pennsylvania in terms of a high CNIT. So again, we're not just in a vacuum, we're competing against other states that are constantly reducing their rates. And so that's why there's a really, I think, more urgency that we felt in Pennsylvania to do this. And I would argue some urgency in New Jersey as well. We're dropping, so we're giving you guys room to move. You can still be the highest rate, but you don't have to be at the 11% mark. So the other thing I would just kind of note in terms of how this played out legislatively and maybe tips for New Jersey, there were at least 3 bills in the House, maybe more, and several in the Senate. So it wasn't just the final proposal. There were lots of different numbers floating around. It really helped create momentum, lots of discussion when you had lots of different ways of tackling this one problem. And it's also amazing that the governor paired this cut with mandatory combined reporting. And that was not in the final legislation, which I think is a testament to Senator Aument and all the hard work that the lawmakers did, because it's very rare to have something this clean go through. And so you might have to make some compromises like that along the way. But I think the fact that we were banging on this door session after session after session, and that we had something so egregious like the highest standard rate really made the difference.
Thank you. And, if we could just quickly, I'm going to stick with you, Elizabeth, and go to Jay, though. Were there, you talked about revenue production and that it's stimulative to the economy. Just quickly, were there a couple of industries that you were particularly focused on that you think are going to be the real, fire behind some of the growth in the revenue line? First to you, Elizabeth, then to Jay.
We haven't really looked at that question. We think it's going to take a couple of years to really see any trends emerge, especially if we stick to this timetable and we don't get, the ideal, which is an acceleration. And that's what we saw with the capital stock and franchise tax. That's what we've seen with other tax reductions. It's a slow process, and it's pretty diverse in terms of the impact because Pennsylvania's economy is very diverse. We're not very dependent on one particular industry. So we're looking at that. I think the chamber is looking at that very closely to see how they can track the influence, but we're not expecting to see it concentrated, at least in the first year or two, on any one particular industry. But I'm sure Jay might have more to say.
Yeah. Thank you. Thank you. Jay, are there any that particularly, clients that are commenting more so than another in an industry?
I can't say there are, and as I mentioned earlier, the way that that the tax base is what we call apportioned among the states now, it just you're no longer punished for having a warehouse, a factory, an office in the Commonwealth, or having more employees here or paying them higher wages. What matters is where the customers are. And that's for every business, at least those that are subject to the corporate income tax. So, I think this will be beneficial for all businesses. I can't say that it's going to be good for the software industry or manufacturing. No, it's going to benefit all businesses in and even outside of the Commonwealth, and really should benefit consumers in the Commonwealth too. Hopefully in the form of perhaps some lower prices. There's a saying that, and I'm not an economist, but there's a thought out there that, hey, at the end of the day, the customer is the person that's paying the taxes via higher price as well. If a company is now selling a product or service in the Commonwealth and they're going to be paying a lower income tax, well, hopefully that will be reflected in the form of a lower price to the consumer here.
Well, Jay, you're a great straight man because I was going to close the conversation talking to that specific issue about, and Senator Aument, I'm going to let you close this out here because exactly that point of, this discussion around that, why would you lower taxes on businesses who can afford to, pay them? And how does the average Pennsylvanian really benefit from this? And maybe you can help us with how you talked about that as this bill proceeded.
It's a great point, and Jay touched on some of this. Before I mention that real quickly, I just want to follow up something Elizabeth said because I think it may be helpful. First is, and Elizabeth's exactly right, there were multiple proposals around the C&I reduction that were offered in the House and the Senate, and I think that was helpful. You had more members that were talking about the issue, that were back home in their districts talking about the issue, but you had multiple options that were on the table. So I do think that is beneficial. Mine was not the only proposal out there. There were at least two others that I can think of the top of my head that were in the Senate. I know there were other proposals that moved in the House. I think that's important. The second issue that she mentioned was how the Governor Wolf came out when he did mention this in the budget address, did try to link this to combined reporting. And we were all very consistent. We have majorities in the House and Senate here. Our majority leader in the House, majority in the Senate, the Speaker of the House, we're all on the same page saying we are happy to negotiate this as the budget process plays out. But at the end of the day, this has to be pro-growth. If we're offsetting this and we are essentially taking a step forward and two steps back, this is not an exercise we're interested in. We can only afford to take steps forward. And we were very consistent with that from the outset. But to your point, and I talked about this a little bit earlier in my comments, that we work very hard in our messaging to make the case that this doesn't just benefit CEOs. This doesn't just benefit corporations. Creating a culture of economic opportunity in Pennsylvania benefits the entire Commonwealth. We've talked about the benefit that brings to our state budget from a revenue perspective. That's beneficial to everyone. When our revenues increase, we're able to do that in a way that protects taxpayers and we're able to provide the services that people expect. But we did data modeling And again, the experience of other states can be very instructive here. Data modeling that points to increase in home values, the increase in workers' wages, specific data points around the increase in workers' wages, and an increase in population. The CNI, reducing the CNI, our data modeling here said by reducing the CNI rate by 1% can increase Pennsylvania's population by at least an additional 18,000 people per year. So benefits to consumers, benefits with respect to home values, benefit to population gains, and certainly a benefit to workers' wages and to the small business community. That's why I mentioned at the outset, the NFIB, the small business advocacy organization here, was an important part of our coalition that was advancing this proposal because they understood the benefit to small businesses. But that's the data here is pretty compelling. And again, I'm excited about the historic step we've taken. I'll just repeat in closing. We know hopefully we can apply some positive pressure on New Jersey. But we have more work to do here to ensure we stay the course, reduce those rates further. We have permitting and regulatory issues we have to address. And certainly I'm committed to doing all that I can to work with the next governor and General Assembly to do that.
Well, speaking of that, right, we talked about before, either candidate who's successful is talking about accelerating. Any ideas about what the acceleration might look like?
So I have not had a detailed conversation with the candidates, but I certainly will as we go into next year. I see no reason why we could not do that same phase down, which was very similar to the proposal that I had. And if it takes the triggers to accomplish it, I'll continue to elevate that conversation. But I think we ought to be able to do it in 5 years rather than 10. That's my personal view. I've not talked to the candidates. I've talked to some of my colleagues, not many of them on this. But rather than a 10-year phase down, I think we ought to be able to do it in 5. And that would really signal to the business community that we're open for business and we're serious about tax reform in Pennsylvania.
And it raises the stakes for New Jersey. So I appreciate your willingness to answer that. And as you said, we're all waiting till you can have direct conversations. But I want to kind of close this section of the webinar with, of course, saying thank you, Senator Aument, Elizabeth, Jay. Feel free to stay with us. We're going to bring on, for the audience, we're going to bring in 2 members from New Jersey, and we're going to continue the conversation. So this year, for our audience, Pennsylvania is a state of 13 million people, and they enacted a budget of $45.2 billion, an increase of 2.92% over the prior year. Now, in the same year, New Jersey, a state of only 9 million or 37% fewer people than Pennsylvania, enacted a budget of $50.6 billion, which was an increase of 8% over the prior year. And that's right. So 4 million fewer people, but New Jersey is spending 11% more each year. Secondly, both Pennsylvania and New Jersey have projected robust surpluses of at least $6 billion. Pennsylvania's leadership, as we were just talking in the first half of the webinar about, chose to invest in tax cuts to fight inflation and grow their economy. On our side of the Delaware, New Jersey's elected leaders, present company excluded, chose to increase spending, only offering one-time rebates, which really do nothing in GSI's view to grow the economy, and it will only continuously increase our tax burden. So it's a clear contrast for us in priorities. So to help further now this conversation, we've brought on 2 guests. First, Senator Mike Testa, who represents the 1st Legislative District in South Jersey, and Jason Rosenberg, leader of the NJCPA State Tax Interest Group, and is also the principal and leader of Wilpham's SALT Income and Franchise Tax Service Line. So, Senator, we're going to jump in and start with you. I know you were listening in the green room to some of the conversation we just had. So, tell us, are you concerned about what Pennsylvania is doing? And if you are, what proposals do you think ought to be considered to address the challenge?
I'm absolutely beyond concerned at this point, Regina. One of the things that we really need is a regional approach. And in order to have a proper regional approach, you need to have parity between the states. One of the things that really concerned me, and for those that follow me know that I've been a real champion for our local breweries. And the state of Pennsylvania was actually mocking us on social media about the regulations that we have in the state of New Jersey that really are punishing, very small business owners who are manufacturers. And I'm the chair of the manufacturing caucus for the state of New Jersey, along with Senator Greenstein. And, I thought it was pretty shameful that, we had to be mocked on social media by a neighboring state who obviously has a flourishing, small brewery culture there, while we're doing everything we possibly can to, strangle that industry, which is a real growth industry, and people of all ages really like to attend those breweries. We have to deal with the facts here. And Regina, you talked about the $50.6 billion budget that New Jersey recently passed. That doesn't even take into account the $25 billion of federal money that we have. It's really sort of hidden how much real dollars are coming through the state of New Jersey and how much fat can really be trimmed from the budget. I sit on the Senate Budget and Appropriations Committee with Senators Oraho, Senator O'Scanlan, Senator Thompson, and we showed that there was approximately about $9 billion that we could have given back to the citizens of the state of New Jersey. And you hear, radio silence on the other side as to how we can really help the average New Jerseyan. And you briefly mentioned the Anchor program, which isn't really going to do anything to help the 9 million residents of the state of New Jersey. In looking at the facts, Regina, New Jersey ranks behind all of our neighbors, and Pennsylvania is working very hard to leave New Jersey even further behind. Pennsylvania is better on all of the factors that affect business competitiveness: minimum wage, the top income tax rate, top corporate tax rate, state sales tax rate, property taxes as a percentage of income, and the national unemployment insurance tax ranking. New Jersey currently has the top corporate tax at 11.5%, the state sales tax at 6.63%, and property taxes paid as a percentage of income, which is 4.98%. We've created a business climate in the state of New Jersey where I've said manufacturers that I'm close with because of my position on the caucus and other businesses are succeeding in spite of the state of New Jersey's heavy regulatory scheme, heavy tax scheme. They're succeeding in spite of the front office. And we should be helping those businesses stay here because we understand that they're the employers. They're the ones who are driving the economy. And it's really unfortunate when you have even another state like Pennsylvania just saying to our breweries, come over here, we'll welcome you with open arms.
Well, and right, you heard Senator Aument really, speak to the idea, not only are they changing several of those attributes that you just talked about that are inhibiting New Jersey, but they're going to accelerate. No doubt, there's no doubt in my mind, what they've got on the table is only going to get more attractive for businesses to come to Pennsylvania.
Sure.
Do you see an opportunity, Senator? And Jason, I'm going to get to you in 1 minute about some of the businesses you're talking to, but do you see an opportunity and a recognition that there are competitive disadvantages here?
So I see an opportunity, honestly, Regina, I don't mean to be political on this one, but I see an opportunity in upcoming elections. But as far as convincing the other side of the aisle that we need to have very real world solutions immediately, I think that we've offered very real world solutions for the past 3 years that I've been in office because we've recognized the issue. I mean, it's a glaring issue. Anyone that has any amount of common sense can look at the state of New Jersey business climate. And when you see, a company like Nabisco who's saying, hey, we're out of here. We're not going to stay here in the state of New Jersey. I'll use Vineland as an example, my hometown where I live and love it here. And this is in prior administrations, and I'm not, knocking any prior administrations, but the climate has been a problem for a very long time. Progresso was right in Vineland after having made a $40 million capital improvement, and in 2 years they left with hundreds of jobs. We know Mercedes-Benz USA left. Unfortunately, the piper has to get paid, and businesses aren't going to stay in the state of New Jersey. And certainly we're not going to attract any new businesses. It's going to be very difficult. In the manufacturing sector, they're succeeding in spite of the state. And they're also typically very specialized manufacturers. They can't possibly compete with overseas because, China and any of the other sundry of countries, India, they're going to crush us because they're going to be able to make the product far more cheaply than we can. I mean, if you think about it, Regina, it's cheaper to import certain items from overseas than it is to make them here. And, I want to bring up one last point. And Jason, I'm not trying to take your time, but you think about the paper bag ban that we have in the state of New Jersey, the paper bag ban. Right now in Elizabeth, New Jersey, there's a paper bag manufacturer that's all union jobs, good benefits. I believe they employ approximately 200 people. Well, how long do you think that manufacturer is going to be able to stay in the state of New Jersey when they can't sell one bag in the state of New Jersey because there's a paper bag ban? It doesn't make any sense whatsoever. That Pennsylvania or Delaware or New York State is going to say, come over here. We'll gladly accept your expertise in making paper bags. And what's funny about it is, what's more green than those paper bags? They're made out of 100% recycled material. I mean, you can't even make this stuff up. And yet we decided to ban paper bags. I mean, and we're always doing things in the state of New Jersey, Regina, as you know, you've been involved in this longer than I have. We're always doing cleanup bills. Why don't we get a bill right the first time around? I mean, anybody who has any modicum of common sense saw that this was going to be a very real problem in the state of New Jersey.
Well, though the business you cited is a great, practical example of what makes New Jersey attractive or not from different, kinds of businesses. And so maybe Jason, let's get you in on this conversation about, the specific clients that you're dealing with, obviously not using their names, but, what are you hearing from them and different industries that, you think are particularly vulnerable because of some of the policies that, we're not adapting to be competitive in our state?
Yeah, sure. And thanks for having me here. So, to be honest, by the time we're speaking with the client more than 9 out of 10 times, right, they already know that their tax burden is significantly higher than the competitor who's located in another state. So by the time we're talking to them, right, clients aren't looking for me to recommend them to leave the state, right? They want to know what the impact is, how best to, disentangle themselves, from the state, what the impact would be. Because they're looking to maintain a competitive advantage, of course. We got to keep in mind, right, with remote work being as prevalent as ever, right, business site selection factors such as labor availability, labor costs, operating costs, right, that's not going to be as important of a differentiator as the business tax climate. Because, businesses can hire anywhere across the U.S., right? You're a business located in Florida, Texas, New Jersey, you're going after the same labor in many cases. And, so that's going to be an important factor when it comes to the business tax climate. And so, clients are having a conversation. They want to talk about, they're expressing their frustration. They do want to keep the business. They do want to keep the workforce in New Jersey, but they also want to, remain competitive. In terms of, your question about vulnerability and, what kind of businesses are looking maybe to leave, I would say it's really going to be any business that's less capital intensive, right? Those are going to be at the top of the list. And I know that's broad, but they're going to be more adept, obviously, and move the business. They're going to have a lot more flexibility. So we're getting a lot of, businesses that are inquiring, hey, I could just, we could have a remote workforce. We could start hiring people in Arizona. We could be, down in Florida. Why stick around in New Jersey? What's the impact? Or we could go across, state lines to Pennsylvania. So, we're getting a lot of those kind of inquiries. We're doing a lot of modeling and analysis, how will that impact the client? And so that's where a lot of the conversation has been. And, and just to add real quickly, I would argue that even prior to corporate tax reform in Pennsylvania, we got a lot of this inquiry as, Pennsylvania, on a pass-through entity perspective, right? Taxes on a 3% rate. And so, Pennsylvania has always a very competitive rate. Now it's just being, more aligned with the corporate tax side as well. So, hopefully that kind of helps give you some insight on that.
Thanks. Yeah. And you mentioned a number of other states, but you also kind of alluded to the idea of now virtual work is so much more available. And even in some of the production, not just service industry, but some of the production. In fact, I noted the other day that two different automobile manufacturers chose to put their next investment of billions of dollars into Georgia, as well as I think it was another southern state for Hyundai. And so what you see is not just, where the companies are, but where they're going to invest. And, one of the things that Mike alluded to, and I'm going to come back to you, Senator Testa, is that, there are some unique kinds of producers in our state that tend to be a little bit more capital intensive. As you said, unique manufacturing, plants that are operations that you referenced, Mike. So I guess, not to be all doom and gloom, I know there are some industries and some businesses that want to continue to invest in New Jersey. And maybe, you could help, because that would be an obvious coalition that we could start to still draw upon to help build some of the support that we talked about with the Pennsylvania group previously on the webinar. They build support inside the business community. So they'd be good advocates, I think, for how we can keep businesses here and keep the investments here. So maybe, Mike, I'll start with you and I'll come back to you, Jason. Like, in addition to the specialized manufacturing, what other businesses are, really want to stay here, really want to invest, but, we need to make changes to help that decision?
Well, I can tell you, I know my district really well, and some of the folks that are in manufacturing are family businesses, multi-generational family businesses. So there's still that X factor that no matter what somebody would be offered, if there's 3 generations working there, they're not going to leave, because, I can tell you that one of the manufacturers that I'm, intimately familiar with, the daughter of the owner was in my homeroom in 9th and 10th grade, and she married one of my closest friends, and they're all in this wonderful business together. I know that, the patriarch of the business, doesn't want to see his children and grandchildren leave. He wants to be able to be there. So there is that factor. Look, New Jersey is a wonderful place to live. So I think that's something that is really keeping a lot of people here. And there's that pride, and look, one of the manufacturers that I can speak about is a major glass and door manufacturer. Well, they put all of the glass and doors in Wawas throughout the state of New Jersey and well beyond. Well, guess what? Wawa needs them here, so they really kind of can't leave. But this is their centralized location. So and look, there's a huge scientific glass manufacturing sector right in the city of Vineland, and throughout Cumberland County, really. Those folks, because of the supply chain, we boast about having some of the greatest sand to make glass. So it's here. So there's no way that they can work remotely. They have to have their manufacturing facility right here and close to the product that helps them make glass, and that's sand. So, I think between the families and certain industries that just really, they need the raw materials that we're, for lack of a better term, mining right here, they need to stay here. But again, we should be easing up the reins on them quite a bit. And look, there's not only just the tax structure, the DEP regulations, which are getting more and more difficult to navigate. God forbid you have a pinelands or a wetlands issue, where there is a manufacturing facility. And, I can tell you, my constituents will say to me, I'm a small manufacturer, and it's almost like I need a general counsel now to be able to, for compliance issues with DEP and other issues like that. This isn't, I'm not out to be a bad actor. And I think New Jersey, far too many times, Regina, sort of legislates and regulates for the bad actor rather than, the overwhelming majority of manufacturers and businesses that are in the state of New Jersey that want to be good actors. They don't want to pollute. They don't want to have any problems. But, it's an uphill battle. And look, I have faith, obviously, in the free market system, but I don't think that we can continue to count on the ingenuity and the spirit of the entrepreneur in the state of New Jersey ad infinitum, because eventually they're just going to get squeezed out of the state of New Jersey. And quite frankly, we deserve better. I've said it before that, the bridge that as we go into Trenton, where it says Trenton makes and the world takes, we have so many specialized manufacturers, but we really need to make that mean something again. Because I can tell you, when I look at that sign and I say, under the gold dome, we take a lot, right? The goal limit, it's a lot in taxes, and we make a lot of mistakes, unfortunately, and it's unfortunate. I'm present company excluded, but.
Well, building, actually, give another example of what you were saying about the regulation. Then, Jason, I'm going to come to you. I think you've heard me say this before, that in one of our GSI forums, economic policy forums, we had a business leader who gave us the experience of trying to start a new entity. And he looked in North Carolina, Virginia, New Jersey. And to your point about the onerous nature of how we approach things is, to start a business in Virginia took 9 pages of data that they wanted. And in North Carolina, I think it was 14 pages. And when he turned to New Jersey to set up the entity, it was 58 pages of information that we were demanding before you could even collect $1 of revenue. So these kinds of benchmarks and looking at other states, I think, are important to help, I think, yourself and build, support for changes in how we approach the support for the industry and building the economy of our state. So, Jason, I'm going to come back to you for a moment, if we could. And other industries that seeing that you really want to invest, staying in New Jersey, and that could maybe help with the coalition?
Yeah, that's a great question. There's certainly companies out there that are considering investing or expanding their footprint in New Jersey. I would say it's more limited than I think some of them that are looking to leave. But from my perspective, and kind of what was alluded by the senator, right? What we're seeing is that other factors are going to play a part, such as the supply chain. Maybe warehousing location is going to be important, logistics, other attributes that are going to outweigh the tax considerations. And, in many cases, this expansion might be the result of maybe businesses that were in New York City, such as the financial service industry, that still want to remain in close proximity to New York. But, obviously New York City, with their high cost and changes to the workforce, with more people adopting hybrid working, that's playing a part in a lot of New York City-based businesses, and especially in the financial sector, that are saying, hey, let's maybe relocate or partially relocate to Jersey City or Hoboken or one of those kind of neighborhoods. For other clients, we're also seeing some foreign businesses that have and overseas investors that are looking to expand to the U.S., right? Inbound companies. But do want to have a geographic presence in the New York region. And, New Jersey is definitely, because of the geography, is definitely on top of their list to have presence on the East Coast. And generally what we're seeing is industries such as pharmaceuticals, biotechnology, and other kind of technology-related businesses, because New Jersey does have, a high concentration of scientists and engineers, right, as part of their workforce labor. So, New Jersey, for these businesses, right? I think New Jersey can lean on these advantages to attract businesses to the state. And so, there's definitely strengths I think that New Jersey offers. And, as if New Jersey can, provide a supporting environment, I think these businesses, do take New Jersey seriously as a place to potentially, locate part of their business to.
Yeah, it's true. We have tremendous assets, and we have an opportunity, I think. And so, Senator, I'm going to give you the final word. Just looking at what Pennsylvania did with a term-limited Democratic governor and a Republican leading, legislature, they were able to build a coalition, right? Businesses, unions, political, both sides of the aisle, bipartisan, support for it inside of the legislature. And I don't think it's a political question, right? Asking, candidates and representatives what they're going to do for the business community to build our economy is not political. That's, a survival. So maybe you can just kind of close us out here with where do you see the opportunity for the coalition to build and the opportunity to make New Jersey more competitive?
Yeah, thank you so much, Regina. I'm actually hopeful that we can find a way forward that actually puts taxpayers first rather than last. I think that others on the opposite side of the aisle from me are keenly aware of what has been happening, and that we can't continue down this road to perdition forever. It's not sustainable. In the current climate, I don't necessarily see the brightest star, for that outcome, but I still remain hopeful, because I can tell you in the hallways of Trenton, there's many other legislators that'll say, I agree with you, but we're not there yet. Well, I think we've been there, and we should have been there for quite some time. As you noted at the outset, Regina, New Jersey saw the current administration bring us a $50.6 billion budget with absolutely zero input from my side of the aisle. We were handed this massive budget, I think it was about 25 minutes prior to having voted on it in SBA, which, that's not fair. That's not how government is supposed to work. It's not transparent. and I misspoke earlier. I said we had proposed $9 billion of tax relief. We had actually proposed $8 billion. I apologize for that, of tax relief. And we increasing the state surplus to $5 billion, more than doubling the proposed debt repayments, and increasing legislative oversight of the Murphy administration spending in a very detailed budget plan that went wholly ignored. Instead, the administration went forward with millions more in pork projects for what looked to be friends and supporters, while dismissing the concerns of very hard-hit taxpayers. One of the other issues that I really want to address, Regina, is we suffer from a massive brain drain here in the state of New Jersey. Young people are not choosing New Jersey, even if they typically have, strong family ties here, because they're going to look at what it costs to live here after they have, amassed what I believe to be a mountain of debt from a 4-year university or beyond. And most 22-year-olds don't want to continue to live in their parents' basement, despite what many memes on social media say. They look elsewhere and say, hey, wait a minute, I might get a lower wage. And that's not even necessarily true anymore in this post-COVID market, but it used to be true. They say, but the cost of living is so much less in a state like Georgia. I have a friend of mine that I graduated law school with that used to send me photos of homes, from Zillow and other places like that for real estate, and then compare it to New Jersey, and say, hey, this is what you get in Georgia, and this is what you get in Jersey for the same price. And it was quite laughable. I mean, it was really, pretty laughable. So, that's an issue that we really need to address, is that brain drain. How are we going to continue to attract younger people? And whether they don't have to have a 4-year degree, but to stay in the manufacturing sector, which, by the way, the average pay with overtime is about $96,000 a year in manufacturing. And that obviously comes without a mountain of 4-year college debt and or beyond if you're getting, postgraduate degrees. I think what we really need to have is much more transparency in the processes that take place in Trenton. And also, when we think about that over-regulatory process that we have, and it's that mentality that is kind of, hey, this is the way it's always been done in the state of New Jersey, and this is the way it's always going to be. Those are hidden taxes, right? When you have an over-regulatory process in 56 pages, well, guess what? That business owner is saying, I'm going to have my accountant, Jason, look at it, and I'm going to have my attorney, Michael, look at it to make sure, well, look, now you just paid an attorney and an accountant to look at something that, why aren't we helping more businesses flourish? So I'm hopeful that common sense will eventually prevail in the state of New Jersey. And I just hope that most of the stakeholders in the state of New Jersey haven't moved out by then.
Well, Senator, thank you. Yeah, you brought up a couple of things that State Senator Aument from Pennsylvania raised with us as well. In terms of the younger generation not really choosing New Jersey, he observed that about Pennsylvania, and making it more attractive was important. And part of that is having good jobs in the state and having an affordable cost of living. So it does sound very similar. I think Pennsylvania is a first mover here in terms of taking real action. But they also did talk about it takes both time and a coalition. So I'm hopeful for our audience that, we had, I think, a pretty honest conversation about both what it took to accomplish this in Pennsylvania and the opportunity that exists for New Jersey to create, I think, a continuously improving and more attractive environment for our state. So Senator Testa and Jason, thank you very much for being with us. And for those, who are interested in further details on Pennsylvania, our latest podcast for the Garden State Initiative is on our website, and you can listen to that, gardenstateinitiative.org, and you'll find our podcast there. And hopefully we will have a follow-up conversation. I'd love, Senator and Jason, to have you back and talk about how we're making progress on this subject next time. So thanks again for being with us, Senator and Jason, and thank you to the audience.
Thank you so very much.